Greetings to you, and welcome to this 17th session on Paul's letter to the Romans. I'm the Reverend Timothy Muse, lead pastor here at St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Alliance, Ohio. And it's a joy to be with you today as we spend this time together, wandering through, examining Paul's foundational letter to Christendom, to Christianity, to this walk of faith as the early church moves forward. As I've said before, we want to keep in mind that this letter is being written to Christians in Rome about 30 years, between 20 and 30 years after the crucifixion and resurrection. So the early expression never really believed that Christianity was going to be a lifestyle. They actually were waiting, the early believers, the ones who first gravitated towards the Christ, they believed that he was going to ascend and come back very quickly. That living a life of faith wasn't necessary. All they really had to do was hold on, almost like they're in the midst of a storm. Just hold on to the rope until the storm abates and everything's going to be great. But as time went on, it was seen that not only did believers start to die, which Paul addresses in other letters, but that generations were coming and going, and more people were coming into the fold. And now there had to be this idea of what does it mean to live like a Christian? And it's not enough to just believe in Jesus and then do whatever you want. That's not acceptable. That's not how this whole Christendom thing works. That's not how this whole Christianity works. Christianity is a lifestyle as much as it is a belief structure. Christianity is a lifestyle that changes one's behaviors, attitudes, thoughts, actions, speech, thinking. To be adhering to the Christ is to have all aspects of one's life altered by the Christian message, by the message of Christ himself. So that's really where Paul starts to lean into with his writings. Because he's addressing people not only that don't, so if you were a Christian, he's addressing people who didn't know what it meant to be a Jew. Okay, so if you were a Jew who became a Christian, so if your Christianity grew out of your Judaism, your Jewish belief structure, then you kind of had an idea of what it meant to live a life of faith under God. But if you were a Gentile, a barbarian, whatever, if you were a non-believer, a non-God person, a non-Yahwist, okay, then you didn't know. You had no idea. I mean, you had no idea what the expectation of God was coming out of the Old Testament. So to live a life of faith, well, you had no idea what a life of faith was. And that's where Paul comes in. That's what Paul is doing. Paul has been laying out not only our brokenness as humans, the fact that we can't fix it ourselves, can't make it right ourselves, going back through the Jewish teaching, back to Adam and Abraham and all of that. But he also brings it forward to talk about our place, our justification, who we are, our recipients of grace versus our actions. Where does salvation come from? Paul is laying forth some of the pivotal foundational theological pieces for the life of faith. And that's where we are. And that's why I'm really spending a lot of time repeating, and I'm really spending a lot of time in a little bit of verse, because these are big things. Big things. I want you to think about it this way. Y'all know what a wedge salad is, right? Take a quarter of an iceberg lettuce, lay it on its side, blue cheese or Italian dressing with bacon and tomatoes on top. That's a wedge salad, okay? And a wedge salad, you can eat a pretty big wedge of iceberg lettuce. But if you were to try to eat the same size wedge of cheesecake, well, if you could do it, you would probably find yourself getting sick. Well, history, just narrative history, can be a lot of ways like a wedge salad. You can take in a lot of history if you're not interpreting it, if you're just taking in the facts. But this is like cheesecake. This is dense. This is heavy stuff. But it is vitally important for us to grasp it as faithful people, because if we don't grasp it, if we don't grasp these theological basis, theology is the understanding of God, okay? If we don't understand how God works in the world and our relationship with God, then our life of faith is either vastly different, it's more shallow, it doesn't affect us, or we're not striving to live into it, or it doesn't matter. So that's why we're spending so much time on these little sections, because these little sections, these little thought blocks are so huge, they're so dense, they're so heavy in what they represent, in what they say, and what they call us to be, and who they call us to be. So keep in mind that Paul is introducing this idea of law, the law of God, to Gentiles, to people who are not trained in the law of God, as you will, if you will, based on how all of this works. All right, they weren't raised as Jews; they were raised as Gentiles, so they don't know. They don't know the difference. They don't know. They don't have the idea of what it means to be faithful, and that's where Paul's at. So he's been spending a lot of time talking about sin and grace, righteousness and wickedness, marriage, adultery, the law, and all of it, wrapping it in together. And that's where we're at, the old written code and the new written code. Okay, that's really everything that Paul is striving to grasp right now, is this idea of a new covenant, a new direction in Jesus Christ. Not that Jesus abolished the law, but Jesus perfected the law. The word is there. Jesus talks about it, and right now it is just not in my head. Fulfill. There we go. He came to fulfill the law. He came to complete the law. He came to say that he was able to hold on to the law so that now he is the judge and not the law. All right. So we're in chapter 7. Now, I would encourage you, have a Bible before you. It doesn't matter what translation you use. You can use I use the New Revised Standard Version. You can use the Message. You can use King James Version. Whatever version works best for you. But have a Bible before you so that you can follow along, of course, so that you can see, you can hear, you can read. It's really important. It's really important to actually read the Bible. I certainly encourage reading the Bible every day. I think daily biblical reading is tantamount. It's powerful for the sake of anybody who's walking a life of faith. So I certainly encourage reading the Bible every day. Read the Bible every day. But regardless, nonetheless, so have a Bible before you. Doesn't matter what translation or paraphrase you use. It really doesn't. It can be written. It can be digital. Whatever works for you. Just have it open before you. I think in a lot of ways, I think this can be separated across. This can be pretty much spoken across the board. When we talk about things like reading the Bible, doing daily devotions, prayer, when we talk about these daily things, this daily interaction with God, we want to make them so ritualized. We want to say that they have to be done a certain way at a certain time in a certain place. And that can help for some, but it doesn't have to be that way for everybody. When we pray, we can pray wherever, whenever. I mean, prayer is a dialogue with God. It can happen when you're driving. It can happen when you shower. It can happen when you're on the treadmill. It can happen when you're walking the dog. Prayer is prayer. You don't have to be in the church on your knees. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't pray in the church on your knees, of course. However, it doesn't have to be that way. It can be, there can be a multiform ways of prayer. Okay? Same with reading the Bible. We can read the Bible in many forms, in many paraphrases, in many translations, in any language that you can read it in. It's okay. Daily devotion, whether you do your daily devotion, if you're not doing daily devotion, this is another, I think, really important thing, really powerful thing. A couple minutes every day. We have devotional books here at the church. There's all kinds of devotional material. You can download devotional apps, or you can get free devotions to your email, whatever. But just a few minutes, and it doesn't matter. Again, where you do it, is far less important than that you do it. All right? And I know I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, and bear with me. Anybody who sits with me in Bible study knows this is kind of how it works. This is how my brain is, because I get so little opportunity to talk about these things, so I want to talk about them when I can. So have a Bible before you. Doesn't matter what translation, doesn't matter if it's big or small, as long as you can read it. As long as you can read it. That's what matters. Okay? And just like watching this, I mean, who knows where you're listening? You could be listening to this. You don't necessarily have to see me, but you can be listening to this in the car, or in the shower, or you could be sitting in the bathtub, or in the hot tub, or out on the deck. You don't have, like I said, it's really about the words that are coming out, the explanation. So there's multiform ways, okay? So don't feel, and I guess the main point is this: don't feel that you can't interact with God, because you can't interact with God in the ways that it seems like you should interact with God. Okay? Let me make sure I'm clear about that. Don't feel you can't interact with God because you can't do it one specific way. You can always interact with God. It doesn't have to be one specific way. Okay? It can be many and various ways. All right. So we are in now chapter 7, Romans chapter 7. And we're at verse 7. Now, again, we have been steeped in this idea of law and salvation, law and grace. All right, so this is chapter 7, verse 7. What then should we say? That the law is sin? By no means. Yet if it had not been for the law, I would have not known sin. I would have not known what it is to covet if the law had not said, do not covet. But sin, seizing the opportunity in the commandment, produced in me all kinds of covetousness. Apart from the law, sin lies dead. I was once alive apart from the law, but when the commandment came, sin revived, and I died. And the very commandment that promised life provided to be death to me. For sin, seizing an opportunity in the commandment, deceived me, and through it killed me. So the law is holy, and the commandment is holy, just and good. Okay, so Paul is really bringing forth here some powerful ideas, some powerful circumstance. All right, Paul is talking about something deep here, and it seems kind of confusing. So I want to make sure that I unpack this here so we're very clear about where Paul is at. So Paul has been talking about the law, the old covenant, the old code, the new code. So when you look at something of the old code and you say, all right, we're going to replace it with the new code, then the first vital question to ask is the old code wrong? Is the old code negative? Let's put it this way. You have a steam iron and you have an electric iron. Well, you replace your steam iron with an electric iron. Does that make the steam iron wrong? No. It just makes the electric iron better, right? Easier to manage, easier to manipulate, easier to do the work. So Paul is doing this great question and answer within the letter because he's not able to be there to ask questions and dialogue with the people. So he's talked about the law, replacing it with grace. So then that leads to the natural question. Is the law sin? Is the law bad? Is the law sinful? Now keep in mind that God gave the law. That God wrote the law. The law is not something that humans have created. The law was created by God. We go back, and when we talk about the law, we talk about the law first to be the 10 Commandments given to Moses by God on Mount Sinai, the 2 stone tablets, but then also the Levitical codes, okay, which are inspired, that stem out of the 10 Commandments. All right? And when we read through Leviticus and Numbers, we see a lot of God giving forth this law about how to live, about how to practice, washing cups, washing bowls, washing hands, the kosher food laws, all this kind of stuff. These are all inspired by God, okay? These are all given to us by God. So they are pure and holy, righteous, important, and just. All right? So the question is, what should we say then? If because of the law, then we sin, is the law itself sin? Think about what Jesus says on the Mount, on the Sermon on the Mount. He says, the law says, do not murder. I say, if you look at someone in anger, you've already committed murder against that person. So the law then, is the law sinful? No. The law is not sinful. That's what Paul is saying. Paul is saying that the law itself is not sinful. That the law doesn't generate sin. Okay? This is a really important piece. The law itself does not generate sin. Okay? The law hasn't become sin. The law hasn't been perverted or changed. The law itself is not sin. All right? First and foremost. So just because grace comes along and overshadows the law doesn't make the law sinful. Doesn't make the law sinful. That is what Paul wants to drive home. We do not want to put our sin on the law. We don't want to say, well, if God hadn't given the law, I wouldn't be a sinner. Right? I mean, that only makes sense. If God hadn't given the law, I wouldn't be a sinner. I'm a sinner because of the law. No, not the case. That is not the case. However, and this is where Paul is laying things out. However, because of the law, I know sin. Yet if it had not been for the law, he says, I would not have known sin. So because of the law, I know sin. Now, that doesn't mean, and notice that Paul doesn't say, because of the law, I am a sinner. Paul says, because of the law, I know sin. I know sin. I know what it means to be a sinner. Because of the law, I know what it means to break relationship with God. Remember, that's what we talked about. That's what sin is. Because of the law, I know what it means to break relationship with God. I know what it means to do wrong. Paul goes into the example. I would not have known what it is to covet if the law had not said, you shall not covet. What does it mean to covet? Now, this really isn't going to be a time to really talk about the particular law, what it means to covet, or the Ten Commandments. I could do a Bible study on the Ten Commandments, which I think would be really, really powerful and important. But that's not what this is. But long and short of it, what does it mean to covet? It means, coveting means wanting something so badly, so intently, that one plans, manipulates, maybe even undoes another in order to get it. Let me give you an example in order to flesh it out. Okay, so the law says you shall not covet your neighbor's house, your neighbor's wife, your neighbor's property. Okay. So, and now it's one thing to be envious. Envious and covetousness are two different things. Envious is to say, I'm envious of my neighbor because my neighbor has a really beautiful wife. Okay, and no, you know what? I'm not going to use that because that example can, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go there. Okay, I'm envious of my neighbor because my neighbor has a beautiful farm. All right, okay, beautiful piece of property. I think that's a little bit better. Let's go there. So that my neighbor has a beautiful piece of property. I'm envious. Now I can be envious and be like, yeah. I mean, hey, you're lucky you got a beautiful piece of property, and move on with my day. But to covet is to now sit back and say, I'm so wanting my neighbor's property. How can I go about getting it? Well, I can offer to buy it. No, my neighbor's not going to sell it. Okay, I want it so badly that I'm going to think about all sort of different ways. Maybe I'll try to steal it. Maybe I'll try to corrupt the bank in order to give it to me. Maybe I'll try to drive my neighbor into bankruptcy. Maybe I'll start spreading lies about my neighbor, whatever, which then would drive my neighbor out of town, and he would short sale his property, and I'd be right there. I'm so sorry to hear you're leaving. I'll buy your property for you. That is to covet, to invest that level of energy and desire and manipulation and planning to get it. Okay? Now, I mean, my neighbor doesn't know anything about this till I enact it. But that's against the law. That's sin. Why is that sin? Because I'm not doing what's best for my neighbor. I'm certainly not spending all of my time raising it up to God and doing what's best for the world. I'm spending all of my time manipulating, trying to figure out how to get what my neighbor has. Now, if I don't have the law, I don't know that that's wrong. I don't. Feels right. Hey, okay, feels right. But once the law tells me that I shouldn't covet, and I start coveting, now it's not that the law is sinful, but that the law is revealing to me the level of my sin, the level of my brokenness. Let me give you another example, a more benign example. Out here at the corner of Union and Beach, there's a stoplight, okay? Now the law says that red light you stop, green light you go, and yellow light you're supposed to slow down, but most people go faster. Okay? That's the law. Now, I know that. And if I go through that red light, well then, I'm breaking the law. I know I'm breaking the law. The red light is not sinful, but I'm being sinful because I'm breaking the law. I'm breaking the agreement that we have with each other as social beings, okay? Now, if I have never been trained, if no one ever taught me how to drive, I learned by myself, and I didn't learn what the street signs meant, and I didn't learn what the stoplights meant. I just went off and did whatever I wanted to do, all right? And I went barreling through a red light. Did I sin? Yeah. Did I know that I sinned? No. Because I didn't know that red light meant stop. Now, if a police officer pulls me over and writes me a ticket, whether I knew it or not doesn't matter. I'm still getting the ticket. But I didn't know it because I didn't know the law. You'll see what Paul is saying here is that knowledge of the law raises up the knowledge of our sin. But sin, seizing the opportunity in the commandment, produced in me all kinds of covetousness. Apart from the law, sin dies. Apart from the law, sin lies dead. Okay, again, this is not to say, and this is the pinnacle here, this is the foundation of this. This is not to say that we are free from the punishment of the law when we don't know it. No. Ignorance is not an excuse. No. This is to say that we are ignorant of the knowledge of our sin. Without the law, without the boundary of the law, we don't know what is sin and what is not. We don't know. Think about your property line with your neighbor. Again, back to our neighbor. If you knew your property line, you know where your property line is, right? You know where your property ends and your neighbor begins. Now, think about whether your neighbor has a pet, a dog, and your neighbor lets their dog out in the backyard. Well, you know where your property line is, but your neighbor's dog may not. So your neighbor's dog crosses the property line. Is your neighbor's dog sinning? Yes. In form. Okay, let me take that back. Is your neighbor's dog breaking the law? Yes, your neighbor's dog is breaking the law. But is your neighbor's dog necessarily sinning? In essence, yes, because they're breaking the law, but your neighbor's dog doesn't know it because they don't know the law. That's what Paul is saying here. When we know the law, when we know what it means to have this law, this boundary, this expectation from God, then when we break it, we know what sin is. We know sin because the law reveals it to us. The law shows it to us. Paul goes, I was once alive apart from the law, but when the commandment came, sin revived and I died. And the very commandment that promised life proved to be the death to me. What Paul is saying here, what Paul is driving at is when we know the law, we know the extent of our brokenness. We know the extent of our need for grace. We know the extent of our rebellion to God. That's what the law shows us. Not that the law causes us to rebel. No, not that the law causes us to sin. The law reveals the extent of the expectation of God, so that when we have the law revealed to us, what we do is we compare what the law says versus what we do. And then we say, okay, you know what? I'm breaking the law because the law says A and I'm doing A minus. Okay? I might not be breaking the law a whole lot, but I'm still breaking the law. I'm still sinning. Okay? I'm still sinning. Which drives me back to that whole, we have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. This is Paul's argument laying out what he said in chapter 3. Why have we all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God? Because the law reveals to us the extent of our sin. The law shows us that no matter how hard we try, we will always rebel against God. That's why Jesus goes into what he goes into in the Sermon on the Mount. So we are all very clear that we have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. This is not to condemn us, but this is to show us our need for grace. That's the whole point. Apart from the law, sin lies dead. It's revived when the law comes back. For sin, seizing an opportunity in the commandments, deceived me, and through it killed me. So the law is holy. The commandment is holy and just and good. So what Paul is trying to drive at here, what Paul is trying to drive at here is that the law is holy and just and good, okay? But what the law reveals in us is our sin and our brokenness. So as a Jew, little Jewish boys and girls grow up learning the law, learning the Torah, learning to speak. They have their rite of initiation into adulthood. And that's awesome. It's great. It's necessary. They learn the law. As a Christian, I grew up in the church learning the law. But if the law is going to, and this is a big question, if the law is going to reveal sin, then why learn it? Wouldn't we just be better off being ignorant? No. Because ignorance is not an excuse when we stand before the throne of God. Ignorance is not an excuse when we stand before the throne of God. Okay. Verse 13, did what is good then bring death to me? By no means. It was sin working death in me through what is good, in order that sin might be shown to be sin, and through the commandments might become sinful beyond measure. All right. So Paul is again wrapping into this argument, and it's a very common argumentative style. Because this is big stuff. And so you need to keep kind of churning it back around again and again and again. So the law is good. The law is good. The law is pure. The law is just. The law is holy. The law is worth studying. The law is worth learning. Whether you grow up as a Jew and you learn the Torah, whether you grow up as a Christian and you learn the catechism, the law is good. And if you haven't grown up as either, well, then learning the law is important. Because what the law says, what the law shows, is the level of our brokenness. The law shows the level of our need for grace. That's what the law shows. The law shows us what we need. The law shows us how we have fallen short of the glory of God. So the law is good, but the law reveals to us the depth of our brokenness. So that's the question. Did what is good then bring death to me? Well, by no means. It was sin working death in me through what is good, in order that sin might be shown to be sin. So sin desires to show the law as not good, but the law is good. The law is pure and just and holy. The law, it exposes my sinfulness, of course, but the law doesn't create my sinfulness. My sinfulness is there. My rebellion is there. My rebellion, my turning away from God is already present. I don't need any help doing that. That's my sinful nature. The law shows me the extent of my sinful nature. The law shows me just how sinful I really am. And we all are. Again, and it's really, really important. It's really, really important to understand that Paul is not doing this because he wants us to feel guilty. Okay? Paul is not doing this because he wants us to feel guilty. Paul is doing this so that we can see the extent of grace. Let me put it this way. Let me use this example. This may help out. All right? So you wake up in the morning and you've got a headache. All right? You've got a headache. And you kind of look at your day, look at the night before. What did you eat? What did you drink? Why do I have a headache? So then so you call your doctor. And you're having a conversation with your doctor. And you say to your doctor, "Doctor, I got a headache." "Okay, well, what's going on? Tell me about it." "All right. Is there anything else?" "Well, no, there's nothing else. That is just a headache." So the doctor's probably going to say, "Take some aspirin or some Tylenol and it'll pass." Okay? But if you call the doctor and say, "Doctor, I got a headache," the doctor says, "Okay, is there anything else?" "Well, yeah, I guess my nose is runny." "Okay, anything else?" "Yeah, my throat's kind of sore." "Okay, anything else?" "Yeah, I got a really raspy cough and a fever and shakes and chills." Now the doctor's going to say, "Wow, it sounds like you got bronchitis or pneumonia. Maybe you need to go to the hospital, or maybe you need some antibiotics." Okay? But the doctor can't diagnose the cure until the doctor knows the specifics of the disease. Well, sin is the same way. We can't diagnose the level of our need for grace until we know just how sinful we are. And before anybody, and please, my brothers and sisters, I'm not saying this because I want you to feel bad, but before anybody says, before you hit pause on this YouTube and you say, "You know what, Pastor, I am not a sinner," yes, you are. We all are. We all are sinners. We are so sinful that we actually have become comfortable in our sin. And that's in many ways. How we think about ourselves, how we think about each other, how we think about our neighbors, our friends, how we think about our government, how we think about people in other countries, how we think about people with different skin color, different language. How we use resources of the earth, water and food and fossil fuels. I would imagine that you probably could, if not on your body, go into your dressing room or into your closet or into your dresser and pull out a piece of clothing that was made in China or Vietnam or Cambodia or Mexico. And those pieces of clothing are being made by people who are living with a substandard wage and substandard working conditions. And we as Americans, as Westerners, are benefiting by other people's lives being extorted for our benefit, our goods. And I'm just tipping the iceberg here, brothers and sisters. I'm just tipping the iceberg. You know, when we talk about how much water we waste or how much food we waste, how much gasoline we use, what happens to the earth when we get gasoline. Systemically, we are embedded in so many different systems that are sinful. Our thought processes, what we say about ourselves, what we say about each other, what we say to each other. You know, Paul says that we are to outdo each other in raising each other up. Jesus says we are to love our neighbor as ourselves. First, that means we need to love ourselves. Second, we need to love our neighbor. How are we doing that? How are you doing with that? So, again, this is not about making people feel guilty. Paul is not wanting us to feel guilty. Paul is wanting us to know the depth of our brokenness and the power of the overwhelming grace that God has given us. And that God's grace overpowers our sin. Look, if you're stuck 20 feet down in a hole, a 12-foot ladder is not going to do you any good. Until you can get a ladder down there, you need to know how deep you are. So the law reveals for us the depth of our sin. The law reveals to us the depth of our sin. So that we then can understand the gift of grace. That's the power that we get here. That's what God is giving us, this powerful gift of grace, because we do truly understand the depth of our sin. Once we have truly grasped the depth of our rebellion, we can truly grasp the immensity of grace. But it's not until we know how much Jesus has to pay that we can see the power of this act right here. Sorry, I had to look at it or know where to point. That's what Paul's driving at. And for a Gentile, for someone who's never experienced the law, for someone who's lived in a world of survival of the fittest, for someone who's lived in a world where, you didn't negotiate or pay a fair wage, you didn't care. For someone who's lived in a world where it's look out for me first and foremost, and if that means I need to kill my neighbor in order to get what I need, well then so be it. Then learning the law is a huge thing. Huge thing. Because learning the law means we begin to understand what it is to live a life of faith. For we know, this is verse 14 now, for we know that the law is a spiritual, but I am of the flesh, sold into slavery under sin. I do not understand my own action, for I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. Now if I do what I do not want, I agree that the law is good. But in fact, it is no longer I that do it, but sin that dwells within me. For I know that nothing good dwells within me, that is in my flesh. I can will what is right, but I cannot do it, for I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I do. Now if I do what I do not want, It is no longer I that does it, but sin that dwells within me. All right, so Paul is driving at here again, and this sounds gloom and awful, but what Paul is really laying out here is that I know that I want to get into heaven. I know that I want to be in God's glory. I know that I want to live in the eternal courts of God. I know that. I know it. Because the promise of salvation, the promise of eternity with God, far outweighs anything else. It has been revealed to me through the scriptures and through the love of others. So I know that that's what I want. But, if I had to get there based on my own actions, well, I'm done. Because no matter how hard I want to, in my head and my heart, live a life reflecting what God wants of me and live a life reflecting a path into eternity, I get angry, I get tired, I prioritize one thing over another, I get short-tempered, impatient, I eat too many donuts, I don't take care of myself like I should, I don't sleep as much as I want, I don't always have the most charitable thoughts. Now, I don't want to have uncharitable thoughts, but they're there. They're part of my past, part of my upbringing, part of my socioeconomic stance, part of all of this. So Paul says, I don't understand my own actions. Because what I want is A, heaven, grace, eternity. What I'm going to get if I depend on myself is B, because I'm not acting like A. All right? I'm not acting in a manner that's going to represent me getting into heaven. I'm acting more in a manner of me going to the other place. Okay? Going down rather than up. I do the very thing I hate. Hate would be, again, and it's important for us to understand that word hate, not as in, I hate you, but as in turning away from. When we hate something, we turn away from it. But the very thing I'm turning away from, I'm doing. That's what Paul's saying. Because sin is so embedded, because sin is so deep, it's so intertwined and entangled in our lives, that there's no way. There's no way that we can live a pure and righteous life. Paul says, I know that nothing good dwells within me. As a human, as flesh, nothing good dwells within me. Again, and this is not, Paul is not doing this so that we feel this immense amount of guilt. No. Paul is doing this so we can feel the immense amount of freedom and grace. Again, it's not about how much, it's not about driving yourself down based on how much you know about your sin. It's about realizing how much you're loved in God's grace because of how much you've sinned. That's what this is about. This is the story of the wicked servant. So the master calls a servant in and collects debt, and the servant, the debt that the servant owes is more than he could ever earn in a lifetime. And the master forgives it. Well, that servant isn't filled with overwhelming grace because that servant doesn't see the level of debt as that big of a deal. So when that servant runs into his brother who owes him a couple bucks and can't pay, that servant throws his brother in jail. Because that servant can't see the level of grace that was given to him. We have the revelation of our sin, not so that we can whip ourselves, but so that we can see the level of grace. So that we can see that the sin that dwells inside of us, that is so entangled in us, is not as powerful as the gift of grace God has given to us. We don't know the power of resurrection until we know just exactly how dead we are. And that's what Paul's talking about here. That's what Paul is laying forth here. So the law is spiritual. The law is perfect, unmarred by flesh, unmarred by the corruption of sin. The struggle is, I am flesh. I'm not spiritual. And flesh is marred and corrupt. Corrupt through generational sinfulness, corrupt through any number of different realities. So that corruption of the flesh is what drives the wedge between the righteousness, the purity of the law, and where we are. That's what Paul is driving at here. So I find it to be a law. So I find it to be a law that when I want to do what is good, evil lies close at hand. For I delight in the law of God in my inmost self, but I see in my members another law at war with the law of my mind, making me captive to the law of sin that dwells in my members. Wretched man that I am. Who will rescue me from the body of death? Thanks be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord. So then, with my mind, I am a slave to the law of God, but with my flesh, I am a slave to the law of sin. All right, so Paul is kind of wrapping this argument up now. And Paul wants to make it very clear. I think in some ways he might even muddy the water a little bit by trying to make it as clear as he is, but he is trying to make it abundantly clear. So the law being spiritual, the law resides in my mind. I know in my mind that I want to be good and pure and perfect. You know, I don't know how many days I always say, that I'll be getting out of bed and I'll be looking forward to my list for the day of what's going to get done, and that list is torpedoes as soon as I put my feet on the floor. It is. That's just the way it works. But in my mind, I can think about how I want to be good and pure and right. And then along comes a dozen donuts, or someone comes along with a coconut cream pie, or, I'm going to go to bed. I'm going to get my good 8 hours worth of sleep, and then along comes, a good movie, or the phone rings. I'm going to eat my vegetables today. And then along comes like cheesy potatoes, or potato au gratin, or, That's what Paul's talking about. In a very real way, that's what Paul's talking about. I find to be a law that when I want to do what is good, evil lies close at hand. So I want to eat healthy. I want my body to be healthy. But evil lies close at hand and says, healthy tastes terrible, dude. Eat what tastes good. Well, okay. Now I'm at war between eating what is healthy and eating what is good. Yeah, there are good things out there that are healthy. I mean, don't get me wrong, okay? I strive to eat pretty well. But nonetheless, you get what I'm saying here. You get where Paul is going with this. Our mind, we want to follow the law. We're not out to, I'm not driving along going, hey, I want to drive through a red light. I didn't wake up this morning to drive through a red light. I don't get behind the wheel and go, I want to break the speed limit. I want to break the driving laws. No, I want to follow the law. But then my phone rings. Or maybe I'm changing the radio station. Or maybe I sneeze. Okay? and I go through the red light. Well, or maybe I'm just not paying attention. Maybe I'm zoning out. Maybe I'm just somewhere else and I go through a stop sign. Evil lies close at hand because I, in my flesh, am a slave to sin. In my flesh, I'm a slave to sin. Until my flesh is reborn, I'm a slave to sin. Wretched man that I am. Again, and Paul is just breaking us down so that we can see the power of Jesus Christ. Wretched man that I am, who will rescue me from this body of death? Who will rescue me from my entrenched sin? Who will rescue me from my brokenness? Who will keep evil at bay even though it is close at hand? Who will stand for me? Thanks be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord. That's the linchpin. That's the whole culmination. Because that which is tearing me down doesn't have the power to overcome that which is lifting me up. And that's Jesus Christ. So Paul is laying out this decimation, not because Paul wants us to feel bad, but because Paul wants us to see the power of Christ's resurrection and the gift of grace that we have been given. That is what this is about. The power of grace and the salvation of Jesus Christ. All right, so I have led us down a really deep road. I'm going to stop here because we're going to go back to this. We're going to keep talking about this. We have a lot more to go here. But we needed to see and really hold on to this. So if you have to listen to it a couple times, listen to it a couple times. But this is deep Christian theology, my brothers and sisters. This is deep, deep stuff. Stuff that most people just won't even begin to walk into. So I thank you for being part of it. I thank you for walking with me into it. If you have any questions or thoughts, if there's something that I haven't made clear, feel free to reach out to me. I'll do the best I can to clarify for you. My contact information will come up when this session's over, so you have a way to get a hold of me. I hope you have a great day. I hope I haven't put too much steam out of your ears. I hope I haven't given you too much. I know I gave you a lot. But I trust you can handle it. I trust you can handle it. So I'll see you again next time for session 18. God bless you. Have a great day.